Lucy Ball, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Hello.
Hi, it's great to have you here. As is often the case before a conversation like this, I was thinking about you, obviously, because I've been doing research and reading about you and that kind of thing. But I was remembering that I think, is this right? The first time, so we met, I think we've met in person once, and it was at our mutual friend Eve Poole's book launch. The reason I question that is because I think I just saw it on your one of the bits of stuff you sent across to me ahead of the call was not the picture we'll probably use for the episode, but another picture of you, which is really familiar to me because I think it was on the website of a leadership program, Claw Leadership, that I worked at for a long time when you were listed as an associate there. The picture is very familiar to me. Anyway, but I don't think we ever met then. I think we met at Eve's book launch. Is that right?
I think that is right. Yeah. I don't even know when that was, Robbie. But I really remember meeting you, and there was something very vibrant about you and our conversation that I remember it really clearly. I remember what I was wearing. I remember thinking, oh, I would really like to have more conversations with Robbie.
Yeah.
I've sent you clients. Have any of them said Lucy Ball sent me?
Oh, I think maybe one. Yeah.
Oh, well, that is more than I've sent you. I've sent you more than one.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, and it's funny, like I remember that conversation very clearly as well. I don't know when it was. I'm going to guess it was like 2017 or something like that. We could check, poor Eve. We could check when her book came out because it'll say that, and I can't remember. 2017, probably 2017. Because I think I was either just about, so I think it was like a transition-y moment for me. I was probably still working part-time at Claw, having done a year. I did a year there full-time and then a year and a bit part-time while working on coaching on the side. And I remember that conversation really clearly as well. And I particularly remember talking about the pairs coaching stuff that you were either, I don't know if you were just getting into it then or you were doing. And we could definitely want to get to that a bit later on. But and then, yeah, here we are a little while later. And yeah, I felt the same about you. And yeah, this is the first time since then that we've ever had a conversation. So I'm really glad we're doing this and we're going to have some chunky time together this afternoon.
Yeah. And you've kind of been there, like read your stuff. And I think you might read mine sometimes, or it's not as regular as yours, but yeah, I've watched you and it's been a pleasure to see what you've been doing. I mean, you're obviously incredibly productive and successful, and we couldn't be more pleased for you.
That's very nice. Yeah, I always smile. I smiled then, people who couldn't see me because most people won't be able to. I smiled when Lucy said productive there. I still find that funny. Like, it's obviously true. I can't deny it now, but I don't always feel like it. And I think that's partly like I have the sense of what more could be created. But yeah, when people started saying that to me, I had to that was a really good moment in my personal growth, because I had to look at it and go, this doesn't feel, I'm not productive. And then look at it and go, oh yeah, I can't really deny that I am. It's just that I guess it's one of those interesting things. It's how we sometimes don't, I don't think I'm productive in the way that I thought people were productive. Something like that. Like, for example, the writing piece, you say, yours isn't as regular as mine. Yeah, that's how I'm productive, right? I write one short article pretty much every week. And then over time, that looks really productive. And it is, right? Because there's like 250 plus of them. But it's not how I thought, something about it is not how I thought people were productive. And so I always still had a little kind of, oh, really there? But that's an amazing feedback also, Lucy. Thank you for that, about that conversation at that time. Because I remember thinking, why has Eve invited me to this thing was part of it. And of course, for me, it's like, I was meeting people like you and I think I ended up having a conversation with you and probably some of, we'll get to this in a second. Listeners who are bored by this can skip forward 2 minutes to get to the actual, the first question. But I think I was talking to you and maybe some of your and Eve's. So people should look up Eve, by the way. She's an amazing woman with a great book called Leadersmithing. You can watch a TEDx talk of the same title, I think, doing lots of interesting things in the world. And she was a big part of, again, that leadership program that I used to work in the office team for. But I remember being there in a conversation with you and maybe some of your and Eve's, do you and Eve know each other from Deloitte? So maybe some of your colleagues from then or something. And it's like, I remember thinking, yeah, I'm, having some of those thoughts about being out of my depth in these conversations. So it's great that didn't come across. And good.
Oh, it really didn't. Really didn't. And there's a little bit of something for me in that, which is, well, people might look up to me and think that they're out of their depth around me because of my experience, and that's hard for me to own. But I am nearly 50 now, and I've been on this journey for over 20 years, and so that's some of my development for myself, is just owning my experience.
Yeah, and I got to say, even more, I felt it again today, reading your bio back and all the training and professional development you've done, and I'm sure we'll touch on some of that, and all the clients you've worked with and all that kind of thing. Yeah, you probably do. You've definitely got experience.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but maybe actually, if you don't mind, you could speak to that a little bit more. I guess so, people, the listeners will have just heard me giving a load of intro to you, right, ahead of the kind of start of the conversation that we've just done. I'll record that later so I can make it extra intimidating for people, so they've really learned who you are and who you've worked with and all that kind of thing in lots of fun ways. But when you say that's something for you to look at yourself, how does it feel from the inside, all those things?
Well, I still feel about 19, I think. And there's some great stuff about that. I still feel playful. I still feel open to learning. I still feel in awe of lots of people that I want to be more like. But I have had to reflect for various reasons over, recent times, whether it's getting a next level of accreditation or talking to clients about my experience. You have to keep retelling the story of yourself, don't you? And so it's got a bit of a narrative flow to it, and it starts with being a philosophy graduate with no idea what to do with her life. Doesn't really set you up for a professional or vocational career, a philosophy degree. And I'm getting quite lost. Finding myself in the corporate world quite young, finding myself in consultancy roles quite young, and having a level of confidence and ability to get away with it that I think I manage just with some brains and some interpersonal skills, with a load of underneath lots and lots of anxiety and am I good enough, and proving, pleasing, and all that kind of stuff, but just ending up exposed to lots and lots of good corporate change, not always corporate, sometimes government, sometimes third sectors, and settings where I was thrown at the deep end in lots of things. So I've worked in a big car manufacturer in HR. I then moved to a consultancy role in a consultancy where I was a senior consultant working with lots of utility companies. I spent time in Deloitte consulting in their change management and leadership practice, where I met Eve Poole, and where I was doing lots of work in organizations going through massive change, process change, tech change. And I was the people person on the team, to running my own consultancy with a bunch of partners, sort of accidentally, joining a small consultancy called Ideas Limited, and then feeling like I had loads to learn. And then within a couple of years, the founder moving on and selling the business to us. And then for 14 years, we ran it, to the last sort of 8 years being Lucy Ball Consulting, and, running my own thing. So, there's been a journey, and along the way, lots and lots of context and experience and variety and stuff been gathered.
Yeah. And in that, Lucy, when did you first come across coaching?
It was at Deloitte. So I guess, that was the 90s, and it was when people were reading The Inner Game of Tennis, and Tim Galway was bringing the inner game of tennis into the inner game of work. Deloitte ran a program with David Hemery and John Whitmore. So John Whitmore was a racing driver, David Henry was an athlete, and they ran a grow model based coaching program in Deloitte for all of us in the people change and leadership team. So I got to learn coaching from them, and we were whacking tennis balls and hitting golf balls into buckets, and there was very much a kind of sport to business transition theme to that learning, and from there coming into contact with Miles Downey and his work and around performance coaching. Trisha Bay was the partner of the leadership and change function that I was in at Deloitte, and then she went on to work with Miles Downey at the school that he set up in the Mall. So I was accidentally just part of this kind of beginnings of the boom of coaching in the corporate world, and was very lucky and privileged to be given very expensive training while I was in Deloitte.
And for people who, I think that inner game of tennis story is so interesting. So you might know, I had Miles on the podcast late last year, and that finally got me. I'd had the inner game of tennis on my Kindle for probably since I read his book, 5 or 6 years before that. And I finally read it. And then I happened, because I was doing some coaching training, to get Coaching for Performance out, which is John Whitmore's book about grow, essentially, but that doesn't really do it justice. It's a great book. And in there was this story that I didn't know until that point, that grow was created based on the inner game. And now I know that, you've just told that story. The story is everywhere. But I don't know if you can, from your point of view, speak to that a little bit more, speak to that kind of beginnings of coaching in the corporate world and what it was like and what those people were like at that time. And tell the stories if people haven't heard them. Tell a tennis ball or golf ball story, because those stories, they're kind of amazing stories.
Well, sporting examples are such a tangible way to bring things to life, aren't they? So what I remember doing is an activity with John, where we had to coach somebody to throw a golf ball in a bucket. And we tried the method of directing them. So your coachee would be standing with their back to the bucket, holding the golf ball, and they had to kind of lob it over their head. And the first way we tried it was, as the coach, you would say left a bit, right a bit, 2 meters out, come. And the second way we tried it was asking questions. Where do you think that ball landed? Do you think it was short, or do you think it was long? Do you think it was to the left or to the right? And then adding our data. Okay, it was short, you were right. Or no, actually it was way long. But when you started with the coachee's awareness of what they were doing, the ball ended up in the bucket 10 times quicker than the directive approach.
I mean, it is nuts. Every time, like I've read Miles's book. I read it a long time ago, and I read it again when I was going to speak to him, and I talked to him about those stories. And they kind of, even as someone who's done a lot of coaching, they're quite hard to hold the reality of that being true somehow. Like, it's like the magical side of it, like, because I guess we're just not taught that's why that book and coaching can be so impactful. I guess we're just not really taught that's how we work often.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the great things, one of the feelings that I associated with that time and those people was a sort of liberation from this paradigm of someone's got the expertise to make you better if you just do what they tell you. And I so needed to hear that. It was very freeing, but it also still is the prevailing paradigm, I would say, 20 years later. So I see those guys now, and they were all guys, and that wasn't ideal, but they were great guys. They were accessible, human, funny, authentic, normal guys who were kind of bursting bubbles, and they had just a lovely way of being with people that they did what they were talking about, well, not just talking about what they. So I guess that was the other thing I was experiencing, was a way of teaching, which was by being what you teach, not just telling people what to do. Yeah. And that oozes off people like Miles, and it oozed off people like John.
Looking back now, maybe that's it. Actually, maybe you just answered the next question that's in my mind, but maybe it's what else then? What else did you learn at that time, seeing the bubbles be burst with those particular people in that particular environment in the corporate world that is still fundamental today?
Well, I think it was at the beginning of me starting to trust that I could be myself, and that was enough. And it coincided with some other things that, that also helped with that, getting trained in Myers-Briggs and getting exposed to strengths-based approaches to development. It still had a long way to go in terms of putting it into practice, but working for people like Trisha Bay and being exposed to the development that I had, starting to feel like if I could check in with myself with what I'm aware of, what I desire, what I want, what feels right to me, what I'm good at, what I love to do, and start to trust that I could follow that and let that guide me. That was a way to run a life. That was a way to run a career. I think that I probably didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
But I feel like that little muscle of checking in regularly with, am I thriving? Is this what I want? Do I like this? Do I like these people? Do I want to be here? Where do I want to be? What do I want a bit more of? What do I want less of? That's become a practice that's served me well in my life and career that I think began there.
Yeah. Maybe we'll come back to that in a sec, because I want to join some dots in what happened. But do you know, like, I hadn't thought about this until just now, but do you know why was Deloitte investing in that with those people at that time? So that's because it's quite forward. I guess what we're saying is, what we think, it sounds like we agree, is that there is, like you said, there's still the prevailing wisdom now that instruction is better than coaching in big parts of education, in big parts of management, across sectors, right? That's still in some ways the prevailing wisdom. And yet there's something magical about the other thing. And so for Deloitte to be training you all up with those people at that time was to be at the forefront, I guess, of a change, which I think has accelerated. Even in the 7 years I've been coaching, I had my 7th anniversary of somebody paying me to coach this week, and last week maybe. Thank you. And even in that time, I think I've seen it accelerate. It's more well known. I have to explain what coaching is to people when they're prospective clients less or in a different way than I did 5, 6, 7 years ago. Some of those big coaching platforms like Better Up and Make It, are actually like, taking it somewhat mainstream. I do some work for Better Up, and they were on the BBC homepage when Prince Harry joined their team. So it's like it's becoming more well known. But I think in your bio it said 1998 was when you did the training with John Whitmore. Like, that's quite ahead of the curve. Why do you think that? Why do you think they were there then?
There were some amazing people in the Deloitte leadership at that time. I don't know Deloitte very well anymore, but at that time there were some people I really looked up to. So there was just something about humanity in the culture of Deloitte. There was a genuine desire to build a culture of humanity, connection, development that I believed, and I think some of the partners there, they were just those kind of people. They had been born that way, been brought up that way, or just learned through experience of relationship building with clients over the years that this was a valid way of being in the world and a way that got results. And I think there was also just the sheer kind of commercial edge and the desire for performance, and it works, you know.
Yeah.
So, there might also have been the excitement and the edge of bringing something new into clients, particularly from the sporting world, which was such an attractive thing for clients to buy. So it was a kind of combination of factors, and it was still a kind of world where you could, so, you know, we got sent to Cyprus for 2 weeks for our induction, because with all of the European new intake, and had an absolute ball on the beach with the Norwegian office. And so there was a kind of investment in people, and a lack of penny pinching around investment in people that was, I think, probably a bit more normal around then. You know, we were doing, in my next role, we would do programs for Unilever and other, you know, where we would like rent a cruise ship, or you know, and I'm not sure how much of that, you know, was allowed after the kind of .com bubble burst, but
yeah, well, and after COVID, I imagine,
and after
even
COVID,
less so, right?
yeah, yeah, and after the, you know, and after, you know, the financial crash and all of that. So it was kind of different times in a way.
Yeah, but like you said, what a time to be there. In lots of ways, to get to learn from all those people and that time. Yeah. And so then, how did you use that initially? Where did the coaching, how did that fit in the next few years?
Well, it was sort of under the radar. It sort of integrated into client work and client projects. And, you know, a lot of what we were doing was big system and process change, you know, putting in a massive Oracle system, and people like me would have the job of facilitating the exec team planning the transformation. And so it was more using coaching skills in the course of a consulting assignment. That I sort of became a coach kind of by accident when I'd left Deloitte and I was in my next consultancy, and one of our clients said, "Would you be my high performance coach, Lucy?" And I was quite taken aback at the request. There was a sort of an assumption that from him that that's what I already was, and loads of imposter syndrome from me. His name is Steve Solomon. I still think of him now as my very first client.
He's on your bio sheet, right?
I've kept his testimonial for all those years because he was my first, and he probably doesn't even know that. In fact, if he'd known at the time, he might not have wanted me. But
is that testimonial from that first engagement? Because it's a really great first testimonial, if it is.
It's a testimonial from the time after I worked with him for a while, and then I ended up working with a lot of his team members who were all sales directors. And so it was after I'd done a lot of work with his direct reports that he wrote that. Which,
let's just because I've got it here and thinking about absorbing it. This is an amazing testimonial. Lucy is the best coach I've come across in 21 years of leading people. I've used 3 external coaches to support my team this year. The group who have worked with Lucy have progressed at circa 5 times the rate of the other groups and are far stronger directors of their business as a result. Our region is leading by 20% this year, and I believe Lucy's coaching is a key reason. Lucy, that is the testimonial that every coach dreams of.
I know Steve is such a sales guy, so he made it all so tangible. You know, he's a banker and a sales guy. He's like 20% this, 5 times this. None of that fluffy stuff. She's supportive and challenging at the same time. No, 5 times better than the others.
So good though. Such a good testimonial. We all need to get Steve to write us.
We need a Steve. Yeah.
So he just asked you. He said, "Will you be my high performance coach?" It's also interesting language, right? High performance coach. I guess maybe because of coaching for performance, and that was that the language.
That was very much the language, and I was working with him on his team around being a high performance team. So there's lots of language around high performance team, the the models of high performing teams that were around were about, and I also think it was what financial services needed to call coaching in order for it to be credible. What it looked like was sitting with people in hotel foyers and talking to the whole person. But that's the label that worked for him, and I didn't really care what it was called.
You said you felt a lot of imposter syndrome, but what was, like, when you remember that engagement, other than the great testimonial, what was it like to actually do the work in that more concentrated way?
I absolutely loved it. And I felt this funny mixture of imposter syndrome, and I'm like doing what I'm meant to be doing, and I do deserve to do it, and I am good at it, and it feels right. And I really loved it. I felt really grateful for the opportunity, and I really loved it. And I started to back myself as well.
Yeah. And did it just grow from there? Was that then what happened next with your coach?
Well, I thought I'd better get some kind of, so I'd had all of the training at Deloitte, but I thought I'd better get some kind of accreditation. And I also started, as part of my role in the consultancy I was at, I started to offer being a coach, as a more of a formal thing. So I think it started to sort of solidify my sense of myself as a coach, amongst other things, and that kind of grew and grew.
And what was the accreditation that you did at that time?
The accreditation was with the Coaching Academy, which I don't even know if it still exists.
Yeah, it does.
In some ways, I've had reason to feel a little bit embarrassed about that, because when I've talked to people who did their accreditation at the Academy of Executive Coaching, and got really high quality people like Miles and teaching them, I've sometimes felt a bit like, I did a real quick and dirty. But it really worked for me. So I had a young child, I was pregnant, I was running a business with 3 business partners that was really busy, and my husband had just gone back to college to study as a physio, and I was the breadwinner. I couldn't afford the time or the money to go to the Academy of Executive Coaching, but I still wanted something that would fit around all that. And it was great. I had to do 100 hours of practice, I had to attend lots of modules, but quite a lot of it was virtual. It was on the phone, which back then was doing stuff virtually. I did a few weekends, so it fitted around my life. And I was in the most incredible group. There was a vicar in our group, there was a teacher in our group, there were some corporate people, but there was also just some people who wanted to be life coaches, some people who wanted to be in the corporate world. I really look back on it fondly.
And I went to I don't know if they did it then, they run a free weekend that you can go to, and when I was kind of playing with what I was going to do with what the hell I was going to do with my life, I went to that as one of the things. And that thing about the people feels really true of that place. Like, I don't know if it's true maybe it's true of lots of coaching trainings, but it wasn't the right place for me to train, but there was something about the mix of people that was there that I liked, and I can really imagine that thing that you're saying. Interesting that but that thing about the kind of almost embarrassed that it wasn't the Academy of Executive Coaching is so interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
Partly because, Lucy, which we can get to, you're now on the other side, aren't you? You're a credit for Apex, and so it's like, which is am I going to get, let me see if I get this right, is it what does Apex stand for?
Let me see if I can get it right. Association for Professional Executive Coaching and Supervision.
There you go. So it's key thing, it has the word executive next to the word coaching, which sounds very important.
Not only that, Robbie, when you get the qualification, you get to call yourself an executive master coach.
I mean, that's almost worth however long it takes itself for all my imposter syndrome, isn't it? But what, like both I guess from both sides, from from having that little feeling of embarrassment and the kind of words executive coaching, you know, what's that about, do you think? Because lots of people would, I think, have some of that feeling from one side or the other, from like, I kind of wish I had that, I want to be able to say that about myself, but I don't feel like I can. I don't think I'm that. Or
God, a number of times I've lied to a taxi driver and just said I'm a primary school teacher or a ballet dancer or a vet, like something people understand that's real. I mean, I don't think it's just for coaches or executive coaches, you know, for anyone who has one of these jobs. You know, my husband's a physiotherapist in the NHS, and everyone knows what that is.
yeah.
So there's something about sounding kind of up yourself that I don't like. There's something about not seeming like you're in the real world that I don't like. There's something about the sense of I have to label myself an executive coach because that means that I'm far superior from just a coach. So there's all of that I'm a bit allergic to.
Yeah.
And I've got more comfortable with it as I've got older. So I don't know what I think for me, I don't know what it will be for others, but for me, that is about just growing into a sense of it's okay to be you. It's okay to be doing what you're doing. It's okay to have something weighty about you, you know?
Yeah.
God, how does that all sound?
Yeah, it sounds true. I mean, it is an interesting thing. Let me see if I can catch this. As you were saying that, particularly, you know, I got older, it changed. Kind of, I might have missed the words, but like the kind of comfort being you. It is like, I think it is something that I worried about as a coach a lot at the start. And I now don't really think about it. Now, part of that might be because I've just decided how I'm going to talk about my work. And part of it, I think, is that gradually over time, that matters less because I've done the work. I know what I am and what I can do because I've done it for thousands of hours. And so it matters a lot less what I call myself at that point. That's one of the things that came up as you were talking. And also that like everything feels awkward. I had this thought last year sometime, like when you're talking about some new part of yourself, it always feels awkward. Like even things I was really, you know, glad about, you know, so we had a baby 18 months ago and it's really weird to start talking about being a dad for a while, really awkward. Anyone who's got married knows how weird it is, you know, and I found it more weird than exciting to talk about husbands and wives at first. Just like, this is language that is just outside of who I am until it's not. And the way, my experience of the way it's not is you just talk about it more. And then after a while, it would be really weird now to not refer to having a wife at this point. And Lucy, because we're talking about executive coaching, maybe it's interesting to talk about that role at Apex, because is this right? You're a what did you say? An accredited master coach, a master executive coach with them.
Yeah, some of those words in some order.
Which sounds very impressive, and I'm sure is very impressive. I don't know why we shouldn't just I shouldn't just laugh at this. Like it is also probably impressive. I don't know. I don't know what the accreditation process involves, but maybe that's interesting because I think these days I had a really interesting conversation on the podcast with a woman called Jean Balfour, and she works in Singapore, and she runs a coach training that's accredited with the ICF. And she had a really interesting point of view on how important it is for the world of coaching to have more than one accrediting body, and for the ones that aren't the ICF to kind of grow and be present, because then you get a really interesting conversation about what is coaching and what is good coaching. And if you just have one, it's like having a monopoly in any industry. The innovation and the conversation stagnates. And I would have thought, when I was reading about Apex, I was like, do I know about this? And I'm not sure that I didn't know about it, but I didn't know much about it. So I guess I'm curious, how did you end up doing that work with them, and what are your thoughts about accreditation and credentials and that whole part of coaching?
Yeah,
there's a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions. God, didn't you ever do any coach training?
Did I say, I can't remember if I said this before.
I
think I said it before we switched on, didn't I? That I said to Lucy, one of the fun things about doing interviews is I can ask as many questions as I want in one go.
Actually, as I tend to do that more as a coach now. So I'll pick the ones I heard.
Perfect.
Well, first of all, I can represent Apex as an Apex member. I'm not going to, represent it as a, officially. I'll give you my take, and so my take on accreditation for myself has largely been: is it an additive and generative process for me? Yeah. The getting the badge and the tick is part of it, but what that gives me is the sense of confidence and permission, and the reduction of the imposter syndrome. But it's also, for me, got to feel like the process itself is additive and useful and developmental. And that was true when I chose the Coaching Academy diploma that I did 20 years ago. And then when I did the Apex accreditation process, I don't know when that was, 5 years ago maybe, what I was looking for was another level of badge, but also another chance to kind of update my story about who I am. And that's why I picked the Apex process. So Apex differentiate themselves from competency-based accreditation processes. Theirs is much more of a narrative-based process. So rather than these are all the boxes you have to tick and the skills you have to demonstrate, what Apex say is tell us who you are, tell us your experience, tell us about your clients, tell us about your philosophy of coaching, tell us about your development journey, narrate yourself. And we'll ask you for references, and we'll ask you for hours, and we'll ask you for, but we're not going to say how many you need. We want to hear how you talk about what you are. We want to see what they call a master's level of self-reflection and self-awareness, so that we know that you're a coach that knows that working on yourself is the work of working with other people. And we're okay if you've done all your coaching in your local community, as well as in your organization. We're okay if you're an internal coach. We're okay if you're an external coach. We're okay if you've come the sports route. We're okay if you've come the corporate route. We're okay if you've come the psychotherapy route. That's not what we're looking for. We're kind of looking for who you are all together. And there's some criteria to help structure the accreditation process and have some standardization of the process, but it attracts mature coaches who are interested in that process. And it's so fascinating being on the accreditation team, because so it's a member run organization as well. So the development is run by members, the accreditation team is run by members, we're all volunteers, and there's a kind of community, being part of a community that I like. It needs to grow, it needs to become more international, it needs to become more diverse, and the board is working on that right now. But I was part of the accreditation team. I get to hear people's stories and help them tell the story. So there's a supportive process of accreditation as well. So you get a partner to work through the process with you. So it's in dialogue. Anyway, I've probably gone on too long about it, but I'm a fan.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think probably 80% of people listening have just thought, I should look into this. Because what, like you said, an additive process.
Yeah, and there's different levels. You can, if you're not ready for the kind of master qualification, there's a couple of levels below that can get you involved in the community as you build up your hours and provide support as you do.
Yeah, nice. And and so just to rewind or go back to your journey a little bit, you did the Coaching Academy training and you worked with Steve, and then how was coaching a part of your work and life from then on? You kind of started advertising coaching, right? Speech marks advertising coaching as a service at the consultancy. What was next?
Well, I was at a consultancy called Ideas Unlimited, which still exists and still going strong.
I thought of those. So we used to work with them at Claw. Maybe that was, did you work on at Claw on short courses or the fellowships? I can't remember.
Both, yeah. So there was a module on both of those called Authentic Leadership, which Dick Robertson, my colleague, and I designed and ran for many years with Claw, and brought in other associates to run, and it ran for many years. It was such a wonderful experience to work with artists. And
it was always, because I used to read the feedback, so this is after you were delivering it. I think Dick was still delivering it, maybe with Tim sometimes, and Susie Oki, I think. And it would always get amongst the feedback on the short courses. I worked on the short courses for a while and then on the fellowships. So if people who want to look this up, this is a leadership program in the cultural sector in the UK, kind of, I think, probably still internationally leading in terms of leadership for arts and culture. When we were doing that, when I was working there weren't many other things like that internationally. Kind of amazing thing. And very visionary program, really, created by a woman who just saw basically a diversity problem in the big jobs in the arts in the UK, and set out to use, she had money, so set out to use that. And I would read the feedback, and that day would always get good mentions, always bring a lot for people. I remember this is a little aside, but because we've been talking about that kind of shift of self-perception, a really key moment, like a really nice moment for me, was on the fellowships one year. So people who don't know, they go on these fellows do like a 9-month-long program, and part of it is starts with a 2-week residential in this farmhouse. It used to be a farmhouse in Kent. It's probably not anymore. I think by the end of when I was working there, we were realizing, it was entirely unworkable for anyone who, couldn't walk around. So it's like there was no way of making that farmhouse successful, but an amazing place while we were there. And I remember Dick asking me to sit in on one part of that day to facilitate it. That was a big deal for me at the time, those times. So yeah, I'll definitely remember that, and seeing the impact that it had. Dick I know well. And so you were then working with him at that organization.
Yeah, so Dick and I'd worked with Dick. I first met Dick when I was about 22. So we'd worked together in a previous life, and then we ran with Steve and Karen and Susie, and I probably forget everyone I want to mention. We ran Ideas Limited for 14 years together. So Dick and I go way back, and the kind of work we were doing at Ideas Limited was sort of big scale engagement work, bringing together sort of 2 organizations after a merger and acquisition, or going through major transformation, strategic change with organizations. And it was a lot of big group intervention stuff, often very colorful and engaging and human, and often wacky and music and color and design. And but it was also slightly more intimate work. It was also work with the leadership teams, or teams leading certain parts of a program, and then sometimes it was one-to-one work. And so I was just weaving more one-to-one work into those kind of assignments. Coaching would often come out of team development work, and loving the range. So for all those 14 years, coaching was not my main gig. I was doing it amongst other things.
Yeah, and sorry, this is a weird question, but I think I know the answer because I've read what you say about yourself. But your website is still Lucy Ball Consulting, right? How does coaching feel now as a part of that? Is that the main thing now? Is that how you think about it, or is it still part of a kind of suite of work that you do?
I would say it's more of a main gig. So I'm usually either working with people one-to-one, or coaching teams, exec team development. Pairs is in there. I know you wanted to touch on that. So working with 2 people at a time. And then supervision and coaching of other coaches is in there. Teaching with the Gestalt International Study Centre is in there. facilitating at the Climate Action Unit. So I've got this sort of portfolio, and so it never felt right to be Lucy Ball coaching. I needed to have I needed to be able to play in wherever I fancied. Yeah. But still the bedrock and the main income is coaching or team coaching in organizations.
Yeah, and look, you've just what you've done, like name checked lots of interesting things that we could double click on and go into, and let's do that because we've got time. But first of all, I'm curious about then that transition, because it was from Ideas Unlimited right to Lucy Ball Consulting. So how did that come about, and yeah, what was important at that time?
It came about in a long, sometimes painful process of asking myself what I wanted, what I didn't want. It was a phase of life when my kids were growing up. It was sort of the beginnings of thinking I wanted to individuate a bit more and prove something to myself without my business partners holding my hand. And there was the agony of not wanting to separate from something, and wonderful friends and partnerships, and a safe place, and a place with lots of memories. So it was a real long drawn out separation that wasn't always easy for me and might not have been easy for others as well. But I think really what, the big theme underneath it was I still had something to prove to myself about what I could do by myself. And I needed to address some of my fears of going it alone without backup. And I think also it was about direction, and it was about how I wanted to be paying my attention, where I wanted to be spending my time and attention. And I think in the role of as a director of an organization with associates, with a business model to feed and business development to feed a business model, what I was supposed to be spending my time on was not always what I wanted to be spending it on, because I really loved that intimate work with clients. And I tried for a long time to sort of get off the drug of that, and then I decided I didn't want to.
And you might not there might not be a good, there might not be a, what do you say, concise answer to this, but you said you had some things you wanted to prove to yourself about what you could do on your own. Have you proved that, or what have you proved to yourself?
I think one of the things I've proved to myself is that I can stand up in front of a group and facilitate a team of heavy hitting people, often blokes, and can feel a sense of power and feel a sense of influence and not be undermined by my inner critic and not need to be rescued by someone. That was something that I've proved to myself.
Do you have is there a particular heavy hitting team of mostly blokes that come to mind as I don't know, that was particularly that you had to really lean into all the courage you must have needed for that?
I couldn't possibly name client names.
Damn. But what, I guess in there, I hear I can hear what's probably the journey from courage to confidence, something like that, that happened as you did that. And I can really feel that sense of what's required of us when it's just us versus what's required of us when we're part of an organization. And I remember, I've probably told this story on the podcast before, but I remember when I was starting out, it was really, really useful to me to coach on behalf of some organizations, and on a really small practical level. For example, with fees, it was really helpful when they charged more than I was comfortable saying, that I could say, we charge this. Because suddenly it's not all on me, right? It's not, even though it never really is, but it feels in those moments like it's all about me. Am I worth this money? And it doesn't have to when there's the company holding me in lots of different ways. And that there was that shift probably happening for you in different ways, or some shift like that. What? What's the question? Again, this is like good interviewing technique. It's like, just start talking. Good coaching as well. Start talking and see what happens at the end of it. Yeah. So the question is, like, specifically, when faced with those kind of heavy hitting teams, probably in big organizations, mostly blokes, you know, you said, I feel power, I feel influence. Like, what specifically have you learned that you do really well in those environments?
Well, one of the things I've noticed that I've learned is that it's really okay to take a colleague with you and do it together.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I had to prove the first bit first, and now I rarely do that stuff without a partner, and I do prefer it that way. But I think the bit that I mean, look, we're all working through some stuff, aren't we? Right? We've all got some kind of underlying stuff, unfinished business, that are the work we choose and the life we choose is helping us to work through. And I think some of mine was about voice, some of mine was about holding a boundary, some of mine was about the fact that I'm 5'2" and I've always looked 10 years younger than I am. So I think it was about kind of owning some space, feeling like an equal, being able to stand my ground, approach, say no, say yes, and just feel some of my personal power in all of that. But yeah, it was development. It was development of my capacity to be in contact with other people, in not just when it was easy, but when there's a bit of heat or a bit of difficulty. And for whatever, you know, reasons that I'll continue to work on in therapy, there are for that felt an important thing for me to learn and to put myself, expose myself to and learn to deal with. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It did to me. And that's all I care about. I don't care about anybody else.
Yeah. Well, tell me what sense it makes to you, because I'm interested in your, you know, what's your version of that? Am I allowed to ask you questions?
Yes, please do. That's my favorite. My favorite part of this podcast, Lucy, is when I get to talk. So thank you for asking. Okay, yeah, let me see if I can actually answer that. So, well, I really get that. It's actually, in a way, I'm kind of doing it right now. I really get that sense of you learn that you want to take people with you sometimes, right? But and I'm actually doing one at the moment. I'm doing some work with a team at the moment, and I said yes to doing it by myself, and that was definitely the right thing to do. And it would be, I'm not sure that I'll do this stuff by myself again, just because it's a lot. Like, actually, the last guest we had on the podcast, John Monks, he's does a lot of facilitation, and in the book that he and his partner at his consultancy wrote, they talk about always have two people there. Now they're partly talking about, especially online, right? Because then you've got one person to do the at least some of the tech stuff, and another person to be facilitating. But I think it works in person, because it's great if you've got one person who can go and see the person who's struggling with things while the other one stays with the group. There's all these advantages to doing something with a group or a team in partnership. There's so much benefit to be had by that. But there's a difference, isn't there, between it's like there's a developmental difference, you might say, between I need to have somebody around and I know for sure that I can handle this by myself, and I'm now choosing to have somebody else around, and they look the same from the outside because you've got somebody else around facilitating the thing with, but inside you, it sounds like, and definitely I'm taking your experience and projecting it onto myself in the future, I can imagine that will feel different to me. It wasn't exactly why I said yes to this particular piece of work that I'm thinking of, but it's going to be a result of that I will know that I can run a process like this, design it, deal with it, facilitate it, all that kind of stuff, manage the clients by myself without help. And that to know that and then choose to work in partnership, I think, what might we say, that allows to be choosing for the right reasons. And to do the thing by ourselves probably allows for me to work through my own version of the stuff that you're talking about, right? And I think that
what you just described really helps me clarify my sort of journey through, and it, you know, maybe where I was at was a bit of dependence or codependence. And where I'm at now is definitely interdependence, but I had to do the independence bit. I had to do the second adolescence, you know. I don't need you grown-ups around. I'm going to do it by myself.
I think that's a really common phase that a lot of probably, I don't know if this is everyone, but certainly I've had that. I've had like phases of work with people, and it probably was, in my business, probably similar thing, actually. It probably was a kind of codependent. It's like, it's the really smart thing to have a lot of people around right now because I need that. And then, the independent phase. And then there's a point at which that is no longer serving, and there's a lot more that can be gained in partnerships. I think the other thing that your answer before spoke to, Lucy, is like that this work, like you talked about the importance of doing work on yourself when you're talking about Apex, and you mentioned psychotherapy then as a part of, I imagine, how you do that. But I'm also aware in that reflection that you just gave on being in front of the heavy hitters, knowing that you've got the power and the influence there, that is a part of the work as well. It's like often if you're aware of yourself, if we're aware of ourselves, if I'm aware of myself, the things I do in my work can be as developmental for me. The business decisions I make, the things I put myself through and say yes to and manage to say no to, or whatever the challenges are, they can be incredibly developmental.
Yeah, I think it's a big driver of my journey is selfishly my own development, what am I interested in developing?
Yeah.
Bit of a growth junkie.
I actually think it's a really good, I've made this decision that the team thing I was talking about before, I didn't wholly make that as a developmental choice, but I have done that before in work. I don't think it's a bad reason to decide things. It's like I was on the coaching team for a leadership program in higher education, and got asked to do facilitation. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. And I decided to do it to see what that was like, to try, and I went into it really, really clearly with the aim of, I want to get to a place where I feel as close to as comfortable facilitating a group of 20 leaders as I do coaching one, because it felt really different at the time. It felt I was full of anxiety. I was basically treating it like, probably said this on the show before, but I used to do lots of acting, lots of plays when I was a student. And I basically treated workshops like that, which is a really stressful way to treat them, because then you have to remember everything you're going to say. And as soon as somebody says something that's off script, you're in your slightly uncomfortable improv territory. So, that was an incredible way to go through it. And actually thinking about it, it was a great way to learn. And it probably, I'm just thinking, if a client said what I've just said to me, I might reflect back something like, it also takes the pressure off a lot. If part of the reason you're doing a piece of work is to grow and learn, then success is growing and learning, which is really different to success being delivering every word of a 2-day workshop to a group of leaders perfectly, or even 20 leaders having a great workshop. All of that's quite outside of my control, but learning is something that I can basically, feel at peace with myself at the end of the day, because I've done that.
Yeah. How did it go?
The facilitation thing.
Yeah,
I'm getting there. It's like I think I thought I could do it in one leadership program at the time, and I was reading back some writing that I wrote during that program actually the other day, and it's obvious that it was working. So it like one round of it definitely worked. I got closer. I got more present in those workshops. I remember it requiring like discomfort, because instead of like basically managing my anxiety by preparing everything I was going to say, I just gradually separated myself from that. But each separation felt like little bit of fear and tearing and all that kind of thing. So yeah, but now, I mean, I think one of the things I've learned from that, so I'm still working on that program. That was probably 2019. So 19, 20, 21, this will be the fourth year. And I worked on it a couple of times in a couple of those years. So probably on the fifth and sixth programs that I'm doing now. Now it's like, I'm really like that. And part of that is because I really understand and it can embody the story of that program. That was one of the key step changes. It was also, interestingly, this is good. It was also in a codependence independence thing, because I worked on it with my friend and colleague Jo Hunter. It's part of her leadership program at 64 Million Artists and one of her leadership programs. And then she went on maternity leave. And that's great. I mean, terrible and annoying for me, because instead of having Jo as this, you know, she's an amazing woman, all-conquering safety net for every moment of discomfort that I have, and also it's her company, so I can just, actually have to delegate the awkward stuff to her because she needs to make a call about that stuff. Instead, I had to deal with it all. And that was difficult at times. It's like, it was difficult to hold the responsibility of the company. Because actually, if something went wrong in one of those workshops, I'm not sure what this would be, but the reputational damage wasn't for me. It's actually safety in independence as well, because it's just on me. Whereas actually, you know, I'm struggling to think what it would actually have been, but something happens in one of those workshops. It would have been on me to handle it well, really, because I was the kind of speech marks most senior person in those rooms for the company, and it would have been on the company if it had gone wrong. So that was pretty uncomfortable. But this year, having done that last year, I have embodied those programs. I know them. I don't need to think really hard in order to do that. So some version of the, you know, the conscious incompetence to unconscious competence move is going on. And I guess it's been, you know, as you asked such a great question, I'll keep talking. It's been, for me, there's also been a kind of, that has been part of a bigger journey of something like integration around like who I am and who I can be. For example, I had this part of me that from the age of 11 to 25, the thing that I mostly did other than work in various different jobs was like act. And then if I'm not in front of groups anymore, like, where is that part of me and what's happened to that? And am I totally happy that it's disappeared? If I'm just doing, it's not quite disappeared, doing one-to-one, and I'm doing a bit of it now, right? Because we're here having a conversation. We have a sense of an audience and we kind of know what that means. But for me, it was also a thing about like, I remember this coming up in a coaching session with my coach. I can remember where I was sitting. It was in our old flat. So it would have been before 2016. Or 2015 or 2016. There's like it's been part of a longer journey for me, which is about, I guess, partly because of working at Claw, actually, but also being in the broader leadership space. Actually, it's not very trendy in lots of circles to be a lead from the front, tallish, charismatic white man. And so actually, I didn't really feel like that was, some parts of me didn't feel like that was okay. Like it was kind of cooler to be an introvert, and definitely cooler to be speech marks more diverse. And so actually, to kind of accept that I have some of those qualities and that I probably want to be using them, that took some growth as well. So quite a lot in there, actually.
Gosh, so much. I mean, there's so many bits of spaghetti that I could pick up from all of what you've just said. Yeah. And one of the things that I was most taken by was this, so that there was some really important stuff there about identity and diversity and a sense of what's okay to be and not okay to be, which I want to put a pin in for a sec.
Yeah.
But the piece around the difference between learning your lines and delivering them and improvising in the here and now with what the group throws at you and how you respond and how they respond, and the back and forth and the sort of co-creation of an experience in an improvisational way, and how terrifying that can feel when you're new to being in a group, and how useful your lines are and your notes are and your preparation is as a transitional object to help you move into that uncertainty. but how gradually you can let them go a little bit and be more in the here and now and trust that you can handle whatever comes your way.
Exactly. And I think that's true of one-to-one coaching as well. I think that's a phase that coaches go through, because, start off thinking a lot of coaches do, and he's thinking a lot about what is the right question to ask when. And for me, a fundamental shift in my coaching, I think, becoming far, far more effective, for want of a better word, better, for want of a better word, is the shift to dancing in the moment. Now, of course, when I look at it now, actually, all that has a lot in common with lots of performance. That there's almost always, especially in a group performance, whether it's music or theatre or something different, there's almost always some frameworks within which you are operating. There kind of has to be, otherwise I don't know what it would be, but there are some frameworks, and then there is some dancing in the moment that kind of has to happen. And that, practicing that as probably as anyone who works with people, but certainly as a coach, is really important. And for me, in all that, was this awareness, I think at the time when I was making that call about the leadership program, was this awareness that I was doing something in my coaching that was incredibly enlivening for me. And when I was delivering stuff for groups, it was not enlivening in the same way. And the question was, which I was coming to that program and the subsequent ones in some ways were my laboratory for, as well as being interesting, important work in lots of ways, rewarding in other ways, was, can I do that with a group? Is that a thing? And if it is, when is it possible, and what's required for it? And I got one of my friends was saying, I don't know how you feel about this, I was quite relieved the other day to find that one of my friends said, who I think he's a consultant as well as a coach, does a lot of culture change work, and she said that the group stuff that she does, her business is, she's trying to grow a consultancy with some partners and that kind of thing, and she said that sometimes she just wishes for a day when she could just have some one-on-one coaching, like where she's just coaching people one-on-one. And I found that really reassuring, because the energy required still does feel quite different to me. To be with a group or a team, I think I am like learning to trust more. But I guess I'm curious, for you, teams and groups are obviously important in your work, and the one-on-one intimate piece you talked about already. How does that feel for you after the practice and the work you've done in terms of maybe that energy exchange piece?
I think it sounds similar to the way you experience it. So I don't get particularly het up before a one-to-one coaching conversation. I do a bit of processing afterwards, but there's not always a huge amount of processing required. There's a simplicity. I'm only tracking one person's experience and one relationship, what's going on between you and me here and now. Add more people into that, you've got multiple realities, multiple cycles of experience. That's a Gestalt term, which I might come to in a minute. Multiple energies. You've got many levels of stuff that you're in charge of. Who's taking up all the airtime? Is it shared properly? What's the objective? Are we moving towards it? How's the clock? Are we sticking to time? How's my co-facilitator? Are we well hitched? Is the heating working? How do I put this across in a way that makes it most receivable? That group's gone off and is taking longer than the other group. That person's now crying in the corner. There's just the level of stuff. And then if you do any kind of pre-contracting, pre-diagnosis interviews, whatever, you're receiving all of that beforehand, all those multiple realities you've got to somehow distill into some kind of design. And then afterwards, I often find that as I'm driving down the motorway, I am flooded with, anger, tears, worry, all sorts of big feelings I often have to process. Thank God for supervision, for supportive colleagues, for all of that stuff, because you hold so much, which is why barely ever do it on my own anymore.
So it's a really, really good point, actually. Like, that's one of the reasons it's like having 2 or more people there is good, because then there's more people holding all of that stuff.
And I find I need space before and space after. I need to supervision before, supervision after. I need to scaffold myself a lot more around the team stuff, and I love the challenge of it.
And there is something about, I don't know, it's like it's interesting to be kind of talking about this, because there is something about, recently I've talked about it a few times on the podcast actually for various reasons, but so regular listeners will know about this, but I've been with one of my colleagues and a former guest, Mike Toller. We've run some coaching training recently, and I was sitting there for a group of consultants who want to be able to do coaching as part of their offer and with teams. So some of the things we're talking about, and I was sitting there at the end of the final module watching some of them coach and thinking, this is one of the most meaningful things that I will do this year, if not the most. And I hadn't really realized it would be that, but there is something about the working with a group in those ways, or a team, that it does have a different feel to the one-on-one work. In terms of, it's like, I guess what I'm saying is there's a reason why, despite all that energy that you're talking about, you do it still, despite all the scaffolding needed and all that kind of thing. And I understand that. You mentioned Gestalt, Lucy, and that's been in my mind a lot recently, because I've actually been in the Gestalt Centre in London a couple of times recently, just to use their space, because it's actually a really nice, they've got a new building. Since I once did I don't know if you know this, before I found coaching, around the time I went on the Coaching Academy weekend, I did a load of therapy training open evenings, including one at the Gestalt Centre, which I really liked. But that was when it was in Old Street or something, and they've now got a really nice new building near St Pancras. So I've been there a couple of times recently. I'm going again next month. So I've been thinking about Gestalt, but you've mentioned it a couple of times. I wonder if you could say a bit about it and how and why it's been important to you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. First of all, I want to ask you one more question.
Oh yeah.
How do you describe Gestalt to people?
Yeah, that's partly why I'm asking you, Lucy. I don't know that I know the answer to that question. I don't have a good answer for that. So I could guess one, but I think that's not that interesting. I mean, essentially, maybe it is. My feel for it is there's a kind of, the problem is all these words get used elsewhere. There's a systemic element to it and our kind of whole person element to it that aren't in some of those other modalities. That's what I remember. And I remember more the feel of the place, the old place and the new place. And, I think I went to, what was it called? One called a therapy training place in London called WPF. And it was a psychodynamic place and it felt really quite clinical. And Gestalt Centre felt much more whole and much more, textured. Which really appealed to me at the time.
No, it's a really nice words, whole and textured. And I often laugh about it. The more I know about Gestalt, the harder I find it to describe what it is to people. And I know that's true for Gestalt proper gurus that I work with. So Gestalt for me has provided a kind of map or a philosophy or a way of being in the world, a way of seeing humanity and how humans grow and change. And it's helped me navigate. It's given me access to a community of whole, warm, welcoming, textured people to learn from. And it continues to have legs for me as a kind of home base. And I used to feel like such a magpie in my kind of 20s and 30s. I would say I would pick from all these different modalities, and I'd be integrative, and there's definitely something to be said for that. And I still am like that in some ways, but I think there's also something to be said for picking something and going deep. Whether it's Jungian work, shadow work, whether it's psychodynamic work, or whatever, takes your fancy, at the bottom of them all, there's something about oneness, connection, spirituality, and that they share a lot of, but there's something about kind of really getting into one school of thought or way of being that has been working for me for about 10 years now, and Gestalt has been. And I've never actually been in the London Gestalt Centre, because my centre for Gestalt is in America on Cape Cod, which is not a bad place to go and learn. You get to go to the beach at lunchtime, and that is a group of people who came out of an institute in Cleveland, and they were the sort of original students of Fritz Perls. So I'm working with people who are kind of a couple of generations down from Fritz Perls, who was the kind of the big name founder of Gestalt, although at this point I always like to shout out to Laura Perls, his wife, who is less showy but nonetheless kind of built the way of working. And yeah, it's very systemic. It has a sense of every human being as existing in an interconnected web of other people, other non-human things, in a context, in an environment. And so it sees everything as a constant co-creation between us and our environment. It has a way of not favoring cognitive or emotional or somatic, but somehow bringing them all together. It's humanistic, so it has a similar kind of underlying sense to as something like person-centered work, which, you know, trusts there's some kind of organismic drive for thriving and health, that if you can help people access, they can find their way. So it's not from that expert, I'll tell you what you need. It's more, you know, let me help you access your own drive for health and growth for you. It's playful and experimental, and very much in the here and now. So in fact, I did a recent very short course for the Apex members called Gestalt Experimentation in the Coaching Room, because so much of, I think, what we do as coaches is we talk about what our clients might do, and then they go and do all of their doing without you. And some of the early Gestalt writing back in the 70s talked about aboutism, you know, that Gestalt was trying to just tear down this sort of culture of rumination and talking about doing, and let's just have an experience here and now. So, you know, instead of talking about what are you going to say to your boss, right, let's put him in the empty chair, talk to him now. Instead of talking about how sad you feel, we say, let's feel it. Let really go to what it feels like. Feel it with now in the room, and then we'll talk to the sadness, you know. So, and it's quite creative. There's kind of some of the early Gestaltists were really attracted to the art and the performance and the creativity of it, and they were often artists and actors and as well, which I'm drawn to that aspect of it. And I teach something called the Cape Cod model, which is an approach to working with pairs, teams, couples, families, to both therapists and coaches, which really supports me in my work with groups, and is also applicable one-to-one. So it's probably enough on Gestalt. I could go on.
We could do another episode on Gestalt, just that. But
yeah, I don't want to give a lecture. I'm sorry.
No, that was great, and there's so much texture in there, and it also makes me feel better that even the people who have been doing it a long time, or especially the people who have been doing it a long time, still struggle to explain it. But there's so much texture in there that people listening will definitely get. You know, it's interesting that, you know, you talk about choosing something and really going deep with it. And then the things you mentioned were, I guess, really psychotherapeutic schools. And I guess I wonder, you know, we talked already about psychotherapy being a part of your personal development, the way that you support yourself in the list of, I don't know what it is, training or professional development on your bio that you sent over to me. There's a long list, like I said, an intimidating list of things that you've learned, but a lot of it is or a number of the things on there are in the counseling and psychotherapy space. What is it about that different but similar related modality to coaching that kind of makes that so important for you?
I think a lot of people in the coaching, particularly sort of organizational, commercial coaching world, have made a lot of money taking what counselors and psychotherapists and healers and witch doctors have been doing for years and putting a trademark on it and making it into a model and making it a bit more future focused and performance focused. But really the fertile, raw goodies of coaching have been mulched in the counselling psychotherapy world. And then I think coaches need to just accept that coaching exists on the back of that world. So for me, it's been going back to the source.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of humility in that world, and a lot, and it's been exploited. I think it's been exploited. So I'm getting a little bit on my soapbox about it, but I think coaches need to understand how much they're standing on the shoulders of counsellors and therapists.
Yeah.
There are some key differences, and it's very important to be aware of the differences, and it's very important to be aware of ethics and safety. And but for me, it quickly became obvious that if I wanted to really deepen my practice at being with people who are going through change and transition or stuckness, that the place to go get what I needed was that world, whether it's getting my own therapy or learning about therapy. And I'm also now working to get accredited as a therapist, so to add that into my practice.
Yeah. And it's like I'm always grateful that as I was experimenting with what was going to happen in this phase, that I got reasonably far with psychotherapy and counseling, because for all those reasons you said, because it brings in this whole, even I just did maybe this is the good segue. What I ended up with, the furthest I got was a 2-term intro to couples counseling, actually, at Tavistock Relationships. And but as part of that, the thing that made me think of that is I read one of those, probably one of the textbooks that you read you get, what's he called? Jacobs, I think he's called, intro to counseling or psychotherapy or something. I can't remember, we could find it, but probably it gets set as reading on lots of intro courses. But it's really like that's informed lots of what I've done as a coach, and, in lots of ways, and probably some of that I would have come to anyway, but those foundations, very important. And I also like that you talked about witch doctors as well, because I was because I heard someone say, I wonder who it was. I'll try and remember this and put it in the show notes if I can remember. I can't now. I heard somebody talking about dreams, and how, in some ways Freud made his, or the psychotherapists in when was that, the 30s, made their name by talking about dreams and analyzing dreams as though that was a new thing, when in fact the witch doctors and shaman have been doing that across the world for thousands of years, and we've just forgotten it briefly. And then these guys become really famous because they bring it back. So there's an element of that as well, probably. I'm not sure I'm going to remember what that is. I've got absolutely no idea. But the segue I'm going to choose, or if you're up for this, is that couples piece. So one of the reasons that conversation that we had at Eve's book launch in 2017 or wherever it was stayed with me was because I think, this is how I remember it, but memory is sketchy at the best of times for everybody, so tell me if this is wrong, was that I think you told me a story about doing some couples training and being either having done or being about to bring that into working with pairs of leaders, essentially, in organizations. So those same dynamics, again, I can imagine the dynamics of the Gestalt are there as well. But there was something about that, and I wonder if you could say, first of all, is my memory vaguely correct? And second of all, so the reason that interested me at the time, right, was because in some ways this whole journey for me was came from couple stuff, came from the reason I ended up on that course was because in some ways the switch that flicked for me around, if I see the world differently, then my life is different, was around romantic relationships. It was around, I can be different in this, and my the relationships I experience will be different if I am different, and if I change how I think about them and I change what I do. And it's like, it feels like the most obvious thing in the world, and yet it wasn't to me. It was like there was some fixed mindset in that space. So that flipped that flipped this journey in some ways for me 10 years ago. And then the couples thing was there. So when you said that in 2017, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And that's why probably part of the reason I remember the pairs thing 5 years later. But yeah. Is that story right? And
yeah,
tell me about the
right.
pairs work that you do.
It is right. And I'd love to talk more about what you got from your experience. It's hard for me not to interview you.
Yeah.
Another one of my link, I didn't give you the link actually, but I set up a kind of web front end called executivepairs.com, and it's my attempt to say, sometimes instead of working with one leader at a time or working with a whole team, it's really good just to get the two key people supported by a coach. And actually my model is to work with 2 coaches and 2 clients. So it's like a square. Yeah. It avoids drama triangles if you do it that way. And there's so much going on in a pair that you sometimes need that. It was also a way of really practically applying my Cape Cod model training. So the Cape Cod model is a way of working, a way of seeing what couples and pairs do, a way of intervening with couples and pairs to raise their awareness of what they're doing, helping couples and pairs experiment with different ways of being with each other. So it was and I still thoroughly believe that it's a massive gap in the coaching market, that there's lots of reasons why it's not ballooning and taking off, because there's stigma and difficulty around, people see it like mediation or marriage guidance, or you have to somehow it's a bit more exposing to say I'm going to do some pairs coaching with my relationship with this person than it is to say I'm going to get something for myself or I'm going to do it with a team. So I'm not going to say it's like a huge part of my business, because it's not a huge part of the market, but I'm chipping away and letting people know it's there, and I'm doing it. I'm doing it with a few other partners who do it with me. And like you said something about seeing, and what I love about working with pairs is that you take off the glasses in which you're looking at what's an individual doing, and you put on the glasses that say, what is this couple doing together? What is the dance they're doing that they're both part of, that they're co-creating, and in what ways is that serving them well? And in what ways might it have a cost, or in what other steps might they need to learn, and that is a really radical way of seeing the world that not many of us have been trained to look at. We don't look at the world like that, and it's also an incredibly empowering thing for people to take part in. And I've been on the end of it. See that, we don't have to be stuck in this way of being. We can change the dance, and I can change it by altering my steps a bit, and you can change it by altering your steps a bit, and suddenly we've got a whole new way of being with each other. Whereas when the tension got high, we used to do this, and now we found a way of doing this. Or you used to be bad cop with the kids, and I used to be good cop, and now we've evened it out a bit. Or you used to be in charge of being the powerful CEO, and I used to be in charge of being the soft, people-focused COO, and now we've worked out that we don't have to polarize. Or whatever the dance is that you're doing, to be able to see it together and not feel stuck in it, it can get results so fast. And often we're stuck with a one-to-one thing, and this guy saying, I can't get on with my CEO, CFO, whatever. If only we could just get you together, we'll solve this in 90 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So I can really see how it links with that. And I don't know if this is the question you were going to ask me before. You can ask your question if it's different. But the thing that you just said that in a way was the switch that I was talking about that got flipped for me 10 years ago was that thing. It's like we have this, there is a relationship dynamic going on here. I don't think I would have used those words. And the key thing is I can do something about that. It's not just, it's not just fixed. And actually, ideally, both people do something about it. But even if I just change something, if I can bring a bit more consciousness and do these kind of things, and I can learn what they might be, and there's lots of great resources out there, I think I can't really, I still haven't really got like still haven't really written about this that much. It's interesting because, it's really hard to overstate the impact on my relationship with my now wife of me knowing that, and her then getting interested in that dance and in playing with it and helping us have a more fulfilling or aligned or loving relationship. It's like, to know that you can do that. And I mean, I don't know about everyone. I can't really speak for everyone else, but for me, the difference between knowing that and doing that and not knowing it is enormous in my life. And my suspicion is there are lots of people who don't know it for whom the difference could be enormous. And there are lots of places people could start with that, which we could put some in the show notes or something. But yeah, I just think so. So if that was the question, if some version of that was the question you were going to ask, that was what came up. So
that's
but I can really,
see it.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
What was the bit that kind of got your attention or led to some change for you?
Yeah, and I mean, look, I'll say it because on the high level, I think a key moment in that was this amazing. I started listening to it again the other day, actually, for probably the 5th time. Amazing audiobook by a woman called Alison Armstrong, called "The Amazing Development of Men," 2nd edition. And so a big part of me, 2nd edition is important because she revamped it a bit and put in some extra stuff. It's just a couple of hours or something like that, 3 hours maybe, audiobook. And for me, it was like, in it was, okay, there are some common dynamics amongst men and women, and you can understand yourself better by listening to this. And it's not perfect everywhere, of course, and it's not perfect for everyone, but it's going to help you a lot if you listen, Robbie, if you listen to this and do some of these things. And then you try a couple of them and it's like, oh, this is an immeasurably better conversation. Maybe I should do this more often. And then suddenly you're away. So if people want to go and look at that. So for me, some of it was the kind of the higher level thing was the thing you said before about there's a dynamic here between the two of us. And if we can change that, that's like the high level insight. And the practical one was, here are some things that men and women do to each other, which don't make either of them happy in a pair. And if you choose to try and think like this a bit more, and the thinking is always give the other person the benefit of the doubt a little bit more, understand that they're doing their best a little bit more. And then if you do these few things, and I'm trying to think what actually, I mean, that book in a way is interesting because it's about, for me, it was about, she made it for women, but actually she found accidentally that lots of men were really interested in it because it kind of explained what the hell they were going through at different stages in their life, which is very useful. It's partly why I went back to it the other day, but yeah, lots. And then it turns out there's this whole world there of people, very wise people who have thought about this stuff a lot that you can learn about a lot.
Yeah, and there ain't that many dances.
Yeah.
And it's once you've seen a few, you can go, oh, that's that one where you've somehow decided between you that you do all the leaning in and you do all the sitting back.
Yeah.
Or so why don't we try just sitting like this for a bit?
Yeah.
Or you've kind of decided between you that you're going to do all the talking and you're going to do all the asking of questions.
Yeah.
And you're noticing that, you're finding that the project you're working on together it's not going well. You're rubbing up against each other. So let's just try. And then this is where the Gestalt thing comes in the session. We get to some realization of what our patterns are and the ways in which they're great and also the ways in which they might be holding us back. And then we try something new. Let's just try, if you just sit and ask all the questions for 5 minutes and you do all the talking. What's it feel like? What happens? What's different? How might you just try and play with that by having a question tally in your next meeting, or really little things that can completely change a dance.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to say. I think that it's really important to say the thing, emphasize the thing you're saying about Gestalt and practicing in the session. That this is something that any coach can do, and is a really powerful thing to do. I mean, they can't do it with the sophistication of somebody who studied Gestalt for 10 years or whatever, but it's like the aboutism. It's a really good point. I did some training kind of indirectly with a guy called Fred Kaufman, not on live calls with him very much. He wrote my favorite book of his is probably The Meaning Revolution. And in this training for coaches, he talked a lot about victim player mindset in the training. And, that's a whole sidebar, but the idea being that when you believe that the world is just happening to you, you're powerless to change it. And often when we're talking about somebody else in a coaching session, we're in victim mindset, right? We're talking about them and they are something in a normal coaching session, unless you can get them in the room in some way that actually in this moment we can't do anything about. And as soon as you shift that into what you're saying, it's like, well, what if they're in this empty chair here? Or I've started, because of that training, running role plays a lot more, even on a really simple scale. It's like, well, what if you had them here, what would you say to them? And then what would they say back to you? And then you're basically in a role play. Or if you want to make it kind of deeper and more dynamic, coach plays one person, client plays the other. And lots and lots of stuff. I'm saying all this partly because, just to bounce off what you're saying, and partly because I think it's coaches listening who have never done either of those two things, playing with one of those next time someone starts talking about a difficult conversation is a really different way of being, and a bit like that, experimenting with the person in the moment, or the pair in the moment, about what it's like to do something different. I don't think I've ever done the empty chair thing, but the role play thing. Just had a client, we've been doing interview prep, but the interview prep we've been doing is every week or two we rock up and I play the hard-nosed exec interviewing him, which is a lot of fun for me. Gets to live out my, I don't know, billions fantasies. And and but you get into the place then, which I think as a coach or a psychotherapist people are often in, but it happens more in psychotherapy. Because in psychotherapy often people, I think more about the transference, about what's going on inside me and how that is a reflection of the person in the conversation with me. But it does allow you, like, this amazing, if you're in the role play, it's really interesting because you get this amazing opportunity to give somebody feedback of what's it like when you're having your difficult conversation with me, like what's the experience of somebody on the other end of that. And of course it's not the same as the real conversation, but surprising things come out of that, and as I'm sure they do if you're letting somebody have that conversation with the imagined boss. So Lucy, we are rapidly approaching the end of our time today. We're not really, we've got loads of time left, but I guess like we said, we could go into that stuff for another 2 hours. I'd love to get just a picture. We've covered most of the stages of your career, and you kind of gave a little brief picture, I think, of what your work with clients looks like now. You kind of mentioned the different moving parts, team, individual, supervision, those things. Which are the bits that are like which you're most interested in at the moment?
Well, I'm interested in them all.
Yeah.
The bits that are, maybe I'll talk about the bits that are newer. Voice of probably my mum in my head going, "You spread yourself so thin, Lucy. Why don't you just stick to one thing?"
So it's kind of the voice of you as well, though, isn't it? It's the voice of like, you can learn to be a magpie for a while and then go deep on one thing.
Yeah. So I think whole other conversation about sort of breadth and depth, and I am getting interested in how I use my skills more systemically around the big issues of the day. I'm getting more, I think, more altruistic in my old age. So the newer things for me, one is the therapy training that I'm doing. And there's a big part of that is about using my skills to support people who don't have access to big training budgets and development budgets and are in a really difficult life context. And so there's a kind of a longer term sense of wanting to do that more. And the other issue that I care about passionately is the environment and what we're doing to the planet and climate change and So I've been on a journey for sort of 3 or 4 years with how do I use my skills in that realm so that I can feel more agency. So I'm already doing a huge amount in my personal life and, you know, directly, but is there a place for me to be a coach or be a consultant or be a facilitator, somewhere where I can say I'm actually doing something about this massive issue that we're all facing as humanity? And so I am doing some work as a facilitator for the University College London Climate Action Unit, which it takes all of what I already know, all my facilitation skills, coaching skills, Gestalt sort of foundations, and allows me to apply it to support people who are working on climate action. And it has also given me some extra stuff, which is the knowledge that the professors at the Climate Action Unit bring of how to talk about climate change in a way that supports people's agency and resourcefulness and propensity to act, rather than leads to hopelessness or stuckness or disempowerment. So finding agency in community on a big, tough systemic issue is something I'm excited about helping people to do. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and I wonder just that idea of taking the gifts, the skills, the experience, the training that you have and putting it to work on these big systemic issues. It sounds like you've really found a way to do that, at least, you know, one way. Maybe there are others as well, I don't know. I imagine hearing that for a lot of people who really feel the pain of those big issues, be it that one or another one, and we probably name some more, but what did you learn from the process? You said it's been like a 3-year process or so of thinking about that. What have you learned about the process of, the kind of, I guess, the facilitator, because in different ways, that's what you are in lots of places, explicitly there, and what most coaches in some ways are, they're a facilitator of change. You know, what is the best way? What did you learn about that process of trying to take those skills and those strengths to the issues that matter to
you? Well, I think the first thing was that I had to sit with quite a lot of hopelessness and despair about the big issue before I found a way to mobilize. And so that was a couple of years journey of getting increasingly tired of holding my concern at bay and not really looking at it. Then really looking at it, which became very overwhelming, and catastrophic thoughts, and then finding a way to talk about that, to find other people who are concerned about it, and to educate myself more, listen to more, read more, look at it, not turn away from it, because turning away from it wasn't really working for me anymore. And then it was really a process of finding community, finding other people, and then things coming out of that in various ways, taking a few little initiatives. So I'm part of a learning and development kind of professional network, and I got together with a colleague and ran a session called How Do You Feel About the Planet with a bunch of colleagues, just to, process how other people were feeling about it. Talked to friends who were working in that area, networked, and it ended up with a connection with this amazing bunch of people at the Climate Action Unit who for years have been chipping away at the systemic level problem of how do policymakers talk to scientists, how do people actually trying to solve this problem work together in a way that doesn't lead to dysfunction and breakdown in dialogue, but can lead to action, taking and saying, what can I do? And I joined a program with them and got some training with them, and I'm now in a small way contributing to some of their work. So yeah, that's what it looked like for me, finding my agency in a very messy way, through connecting with others. And some of it was sort of dark nights of the soul, and some of it was a bit more joyful.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard someone talking the other day about how there's a real absence of joy in a lot of the what would we call it, environmental movement, and that makes it hard to enroll people sometimes, because, like you said, the dark nights of the soul, it's not, if there's something that's completely absent of joy, it's really hard to look at it.
I think it appears that there's an absence of joy when you only read about it.
Yeah,
what you read when you're on the edges of those communities of people who are acting, what you hear is the rage and the outrage and the doom and gloom and the fear, and when you're in the communities doing something about it, you take the lid off the joy, or you see behind the curtain. And however you choose to get involved in whatever issue you want to get involved in, I think it's once you're acting in community that you discover that humanity can't do this stuff without joy. So whether it's, you might feel all of the rage and all of the fear, but stringing up your hammock across Oxford Street and cooking street food for your Extinction Rebellion pals, which is what a friend of mine has done recently, has got joy in it.
Yeah.
And I'm facilitating with a couple of amazing neuroscientists for a group who are in a church community, and there's all sorts of fear about where we're going, but there's also a lot of laughs about trying to fix it and doing it together. So the media is not portraying the joy that's available.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really, does it? There's not a lot of space in the media for joy. It's not really what sells newspapers or gets clicks on the BBC. Yeah. Lucy, I'm gonna ask a really practical question. It might feel like a little bit of a jump, but I'm curious. Just want to ask one of these practical questions. We haven't really got into the day-to-day of your coaching practice these days. And so I'm curious, when you do one-on-one work, because we've talked about everything else really in quite a lot of detail. Well, we've touched on in detail all the other bits of the work that you do apart from the one-to-one coaching. And that's perfect. That's part of life as a coach really, is all those other bits, all the different things that many of us end up doing. Who are your one-to-one clients these days?
Mm-hmm.
Where do they come from? And if there is a typical way that you like to work in terms of number of sessions, structures, that kind of thing, what is it? And if not, why isn't there?
I'm really glad we're talking about this, because maybe I take it for granted, and because it's such a bedrock of what I do. So my clients are a mixture of, they're nearly all organizations of some scale, but the more people have moved from big organizations to smaller organizations, I've ended up with a range of sizes organization. I think just because of my age and network and experience, there tend to be people who are on the exec team or board, or who are one or maybe two levels below that. Some of them are come from relationships that go back years and years, HR directors who I knew when they were an HR business partner and just starting out, and they're now HRD. Somebody who I did a team development piece, and then eventually they started climbing the ladder and wanted me to work with their team, and then now I barely see them because I'm just working with their people, because they've got so there's a lot of just by reputation and relationship. I do have some clients where I'm on the coach register / faculty.
Yeah, I was going to say that. So this is maybe just too long an answer, but for people who are interested in doing that kind of work, what are the steps to do that? So it's like if people who are, it's the executive coaching thing again in some ways, isn't it? It's like to be in that corporate leadership space. Sounds like a part of it's the relationships. What, for somebody who wanted to get into there, are there any steps that make a difference?
I think I'm in danger of being a bit like my mum trying to teach me how to parent.
Yeah.
It's like, it was so long ago that she did it.
Yeah.
And times have changed so much.
Yeah.
That she probably really shouldn't be trying to advise me. I mean, I've taken my route, which is through organizations through which I've met lots of people. It really depends where you start from. You know, that's probably such an unhelpful question, but if you're not in and connected to systems, organizations, networks, you need to find a way to be in.
Yeah.
By being an associate, by joining some training where you meet people who are in. It's this mycelial network of, you know, give and take and trust, and that we're all part of. You need to be in it. You need to find your way in it. And give so that you're easy to give back to. Make yourself known, and never be afraid to say what you want. I would like to be on the coaching register. How do I do that? Do you know anyone who can help me? Because I really want to. I don't know.
I think it's a great answer, Lucy. Like, because it's actually really clear that it is you said it really clearly. It's like, if you're not connected in, then find the way to connect in. And it's like, you know, it might be that the exact way that you did that, I don't know, whenever you think it, well, from the start of your career, right? Because you were in those big organizations in different ways a lot. That might not be the way that someone else will do it, but they will have found, if they end up doing that kind of work, it will, I'm pretty sure, always be because, maybe not quite, but almost always be because they found the way to have those connections. So then 2 more questions about that. One is, I imagine that it sounds like that's been the kind of, those kinds of coaching engagements have been they're the bedrock. And it sounds like they've probably, engagements with those kinds of people have been the bedrock for a while. So I'm hypothesizing that if you didn't like doing that work in lots of ways, you would probably have stopped, or it would have changed some way. So if that's right, what do you like about that work? And then back to that thing that I asked before, practically, what does that tend to look like?
Well, maybe do the practical side first. So it tends to look like packages of sessions. It tends to have there's always a chemistry session, so that a coachee is choosing somebody they've got a good sense of.
Anything in particular you do in those sessions?
They're 25 minutes long. I don't charge for them. I ask people if they've had a coach before. I ask them what their expectations are. I ask them what they hope to get out of it. I ask them what they want to ask me. Yeah. I have a little spiel about me, but I tend to ask them first what they want to know. I have learned just to be myself and try not to sell myself to what they're asking for, but just say who I am. And some people say no and some people say yes. And then sometimes I like to do a little bit of work in the session, because I like to experiment. What if we just did 5 minutes on that now?
Yeah, nice. And then you said packages of sessions. Do you have like a favored, I don't know, number of sessions that you like to do with people, or does it depend on the organization?
I do bespoke it, but it, you know, often ends up looking similar. And sometimes a client comes with a notion, you know, we're going to do 4, we're going to do 6, it's going to be a year, they're going to be monthly. Yeah. There is usually a bit of a diagnostic phase in which I'll definitely talk to the coachee. I'll sometimes also talk to line managers or HR directors or VPs, and then put forward this is what I think. They tend to be in blocks rather than open-ended, because I quite like to do a block and then review, and do a block and then review. And they're anything between 2 sessions, 2 weeks apart and 6 weeks apart. And then if I get into a longer relationship with somebody, I'll really let them set the pace, and they might want to see me twice a year, or and the trigger is often org change or a 360 feedback or a development program they've been on. I do goal setting, contracting. The more I study psychotherapy, the hotter I am on ethics, confidentiality, legality, safety.
Yeah.
And I try to develop a relationship with the buyer. I try to have a relationship with the HRD. I try to have a relationship with the sponsor and check in and make myself available. And there's a little bit of unpaid work around that, but I do see it as a relationship sell over time and a trust building piece over time.
Yeah. And then in terms of what you enjoy about that work or what you like about it?
I just never got over the thrill of being someone who someone trusts to think out loud with.
Yeah.
I find it intensely engaging and absorbing. The time goes like that. I love the challenge of everybody's different. Some people come open like this and some people come closed like this, and so you never know what you're going to get. I love applying the skills and techniques that I've picked up over the years. I love experimenting and playing and let's try something now and see what happens. I love the satisfaction of somebody saying, wow, my God, I never thought about that before. Isn't that amazing? Or I've never told that to anyone before. So I know there's some ego in there as well. That's some kind of feel good that I'm helping you.
Yeah. I
think that's part similar to what you get out of it.
Yeah, I don't think we should worry about that really. Like, because part of it is, it's like people worrying about getting paid sometimes. It's like, well, you've got to do, if this is going to keep, if this is good work, that it's good for you to be doing, it has to in some way become sustainable. And so we have to get, probably, for most people, it's useful to get some money. And for everyone, it's useful if it gives you some things that nourish you and some energy. And so don't think anyone should feel guilty about feeling good when you get those moments where somebody says, you know, I've never thought about that before. I see my whole world differently, or whatever that is.
I think the thing you said about energy exchange is really interesting. I get energy from the process itself, regardless of the result.
Yeah.
And I think that has sustained me doing this work for so long. Even the ones where you say, sorry, it's not going anywhere. I still got energy off the sessions where it wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Somehow, because I think it's like a craft mentality rather than I don't know what the opposite is, but even if I make a shit plate, the process of throwing the plate and painting it and glazing it was a joy to me.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's like, to make it sustainable, if that can be true, that's a resilience tool, right? If that's true, where if everything's tied to the result and whether the person has a great time, that's like makes life, I think, a lot harder. And like you say, it makes it harder to keep doing something like this for such a long time. Lucy, we actually are almost at time now. Before we finish, is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to say or share, or anything that feels important that's unsaid at the moment?
Yeah, loads. I feel like I haven't mentioned my family.
Yeah.
You know, all these 20 years I've been married to someone, I've been bringing up 2 boys who are now nearly adults themselves. I've been a sister, I've been a friend, I've had a life, and that just feels like deserves a mention.
Yeah, and if you think about the journey that you've been on, the answer's probably everywhere. This is a terrible question, but what I was going to ask is, where have been the moments where that has played a really big part in your journey?
Well, I think it's a constant decision making around where I spend my time and energy. So it's very present in my sort of life juggle, which you're familiar with and we're all familiar with. Have a kind of real joy and enthusiasm for work, and I have to really work hard at the balance. my family are the kind of rock and the safe place and my nourishment and my, the place from which I can be me. So everything is the answer to, what are they to me? And they support my work in every way by just enabling me to function in the world as a happy, healthy human being. I hope I've shown my boys something about what it is to be a woman in the world who is financially independent, is powerful, is, can be a mother and can be a worker. That felt like it was sort of my generation of women's job to prove could be pulled off, often at great cost to us. But my husband has been the most incredible modern man around all of that, and been a real team player with all of that. That's something that's just some of what springs to mind.
Yeah, lovely. Feels like a really nice place to bring this conversation to a close, Lucy. It feels like there were lots of things we could have double clicked on perhaps that we didn't, and I didn't get to ask about. Vertical development, wanted to compare our notes on that, and all kinds of other things that'll have to wait for a second.
One of the most useful maps of the world that I hold. It's just a map, but it's very useful.
Which is there which particular one for people so they can look it up?
Well, the two that I'm familiar with is Talbot's model, so the Hart Hill model, and also Terry O'Fallon's stages model.
Okay. So people can we'll put links to those in the wherever people are listening to this. And I didn't come across the Terry O'Fallon one, and then there was a great 2-part podcast, I think one with Terry O'Fallon and one with somebody else, on the Coaches Rising podcast recently, where I can learn about that. And I've learned quite a bit, different bits about vertical development from them. So people can look that up. Useful maps. We'll put links to everything we've talked about wherever people are listening, and at thecoachesjourney.com. But mostly, Lucy, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun, and I wish it hadn't been, 5 years since we were last having a conversation. Let's do this again in less than 5 years' time.
I would love that. It seems like a very elaborate way to have a chat with you.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, and for me to have a chat with you, it's like, well, but I sometimes think it is like, one of my current struggles is I'm very aware that I don't create. My attempt to be a modern man is, and be the kind of dad I want to be, is that I only work 4 days now since my daughter was born. And one of the results of that is I've just doubled down on my very kind of strict, what do I say yes and no to? And it does mean that I am often thinking strange thoughts like, well, can I create, having a conversation with somebody, it's like, can I create content out of this? But yes, this is an elaborate way to get to hang out, but we could do it again. Like, that's the good thing. It got it on our radar. Here we are having this conversation. So we'll do it. Listeners, if you end up just getting Lucy on every month's Coaches Journey podcast from now on, maybe that's just how you found time to hang out. So yeah, Lucy, thanks so much.
Oh my God, you're so welcome. And thank you to all the people that have supported me along the way, and all my colleagues and the people I learned from. And I know it feels very much like this has been an interview with Lucy, but I am so aware of the chorus of support and partnership and teaching and learning that I've had from all the names I've mentioned in this, and all the ones I haven't. So big love to all of those people.
Yeah, you can really feel them in this conversation, actually, because they have been so present. Yeah, thanks so much, Lucy.
Alrighty, see you soon.